The streets of the city were alive with the hustle and bustle of the holiday season, adorned with twinkling lights and bustling shoppers carrying bags brimming with gifts. Yet, for Melanie, the spirit of Christmas felt distant, an echo of happier times. Clad in her worn but neatly mended coat, she trudged through the snow, clutching a small, ragged Christmas tree she had salvaged from the curb. It was no more than 2 feet tall, with sparse branches and fading green needles, but to Melanie, it was more than a mere decoration. It was a lifeline to memories of her late father and the strength of their family during the most difficult of times. Melanie's hands trembled slightly as the wind howled through the alleyways, biting at her exposed fingers. She pulled the tree closer, as if shielding it from the derisive glances of strangers who passed by. Some whispered, others chuckled softly, but most paid her no mind, lost in their own pursuits of festive perfection. To Melanie, their indifference was almost a comfort. The world around her was too preoccupied to notice her quiet determination to carry this fragile piece of her history back home. As she approached the modest apartment she shared with her young daughter, Clara, the weight of her burden seemed to grow heavier. Life had been unkind in recent years. Her husband had passed away unexpectedly, leaving her to navigate the storm of single parenthood while juggling her low-paying job as a janitor at a prestigious office building. Despite it all, Melanie clung to her principles: hard work, humility, and an unwavering belief in the importance of preserving the small joys in life, like the traditions tied to this tree. She paused outside the apartment building, gazing up at the frost-covered windows. Clara would be home soon, her face lighting up as she saw the tiny tree Melanie had promised to bring. It wasn't much, certainly not the grand, glittering centerpiece displayed in department stores, but it was theirs. With a deep breath, Melanie stepped inside, the warmth of the building thawing her stiff fingers as she climbed the creaking stairs. Her apartment was modest but clean, with faded wallpaper and second-hand furniture that spoke of years of frugality. She placed the tree gently on the small dining table, adjusting its crooked trunk so it stood upright. For Melanie, this tree was more than a decoration. It was a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope that had carried her through countless storms. And in the glow of the dim kitchen light, she vowed to make this Christmas special for Clara, no matter how humble their circumstances. The office building where Melanie worked was a towering glass structure that sparkled like a jewel in the city skyline. Inside, the air was filled with the hum of printers, the clatter of keyboards, and the polished chatter of employees dressed in designer suits. For Melanie, the building was both a livelihood and a constant reminder of her position at the bottom of its hierarchy. Every morning, she arrived early to scrub floors, empty trash bins, and clean restrooms, her presence acknowledged only when something was deemed unsatisfactory. Her coworkers rarely addressed her directly, save for the occasional curt remark or condescending glance. She was invisible to them, a background figure in their lives of luxury and ambition. Yet, Melanie bore their indifference with quiet dignity. She worked hard, keeping her head down and focusing on the task at hand. It wasn't pride that fueled her perseverance but a sense of responsibility to provide for Clara and to set an example of resilience in the face of hardship. That morning, the air in the office was abuzz with excitement. The annual Christmas party was just days away, and employees chatted animatedly about the event. Melanie couldn't help but overhear snippets of their conversations as she emptied wastebaskets and wiped down desks. "It's going to be the best party yet," one woman gushed. "I heard the decorations are going to be breathtaking. Everyone's supposed to bring something festive to contribute." The words lingered in Melanie's mind as she moved to the next office. A Christmas party. Decorations. She wondered if her small, battered tree would be welcomed or if it would be the target of ridicule. Her coworkers often flaunted their wealth and taste, bringing expensive, showy items to previous events. Melanie hesitated, torn between her desire to participate and the fear of being mocked for her humble offering. By the end of her shift, Melanie resolved to bring the tree. It wasn't grand or glittering, but it was steeped in meaning, a testament to the strength and love of her family. With that thought, she finished her tasks and prepared to face whatever judgment the party might bring. The Christmas spirit in the office was in full swing when the announcement came. The HR representative stood at the front of the main floor, addressing the crowd with a cheerful smile. "This year's Christmas party will be held in the Grand Hall on the 20th, she said, her voice ringing with enthusiasm. "As always, we encourage everyone to bring a decoration that represents what the holiday season means to you." Melanie stood in the back, leaning on her cleaning cart as she listened. Her hands were still damp from scrubbing the break room sink, but for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what she could bring. The tree came to mind instantly, but doubt quickly followed. What would her colleagues think of such a shabby piece? Would they even understand its value? The room erupted into excited chatter as employees discussed their plans. "I'm thinking of bringing a crystal snow globe from Paris," one man bragged. "It's exquisite." Another chimed in, "I've got this hand-blown glass ornament from Italy. It's going to outshine everything else there." Their words filled Melanie with a sinking feeling. How could her little tree, with its bent branches and faded needles, compete with treasures from around the world? As she returned to her duties, she overheard Jessica, a senior manager known for her sharp tongue, mocking the very idea of humble contributions. "Can you imagine someone bringing something cheap or homemade?" she said with a laugh. "It'd be downright embarrassing." Melanie's cheeks flushed with a mix of anger and shame, but she kept her head down, focusing on her work. Later that evening, as Melanie walked home through the snow, she thought about the announcement. Despite her fears, she decided she would bring the tree. It wasn't about impressing her colleagues, it was about sharing a piece of herself and her family's story. No amount of ridicule could take that away from her. At home, Melanie placed the tiny tree on her kitchen table and ran her fingers gently over its splintered base. The wood felt familiar, as though her father's hands were still shaping it all these years later. She could almost hear his voice, low and reassuring, telling her stories about how the tree had been made. It wasn't perfect, nothing they owned ever was, but it had been crafted with care and love, a beacon of hope during one of the darkest winters of her life. She sat down and unwrapped a small box from the cupboard, revealing the ornaments that had accompanied the tree every year. Each one was handmade, some from scraps of cloth, others from carefully folded paper. Her favorite was a small star fashioned from golden foil, its edges frayed but still shimmering faintly under the kitchen light. Her father had always placed it at the top, saying, "Even the smallest star can light up the darkest night." That winter had been particularly harsh. Melanie's family had lost their home when her father's construction job dried up. They moved into a cramped shelter, where warmth came more from their closeness than the thin blankets they shared. Melanie remembered the way her father had scavenged for materials, working late into the night to create the tree. "We may not have much," he had told them, "but we'll always have Christmas." The memory made her smile, even as tears threatened to spill. Clara walked into the room, her small hands clutching a school notebook. "Mommy, is that the tree you told me about?" she asked, her wide eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and wonder. Melanie nodded, pulling her daughter onto her lap. "This tree is special, Clara," she said. "It reminds us that even when we have very little, we still have each other. That's what matters most." Clara stared at the tree thoughtfully before breaking into a grin. "It's the prettiest tree ever," she declared, her enthusiasm warming Melanie's heart. That evening, as Melanie prepared dinner, she couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. The tree was more than a decoration, it was a legacy, a reminder of her family's strength and love. No matter what happened at the office party, she knew it was a symbol worth sharing. The next morning at work, the atmosphere buzzed with holiday excitement. Employees exchanged stories about their planned contributions for the party, boasting about their elaborate decorations. Melanie moved quietly through the break room, refilling the coffee station and wiping down tables as snippets of their conversations reached her ears. "Have you seen that custom wreath I ordered? It's covered in Swarovski crystals," Jessica bragged, drawing a chorus of impressed gasps. Melanie tried to keep her head down, but her hands trembled as she placed a clean coffee pot on the burner. She hadn't told anyone about her plans to bring the tiny tree, but the fear of their judgment loomed large in her mind. At that moment, one of the younger employees, a chatty intern named Amanda, noticed Melanie tidying up. "Hey, Melanie," Amanda said brightly, "are you bringing anything to the party? Everyone's contributing something, right?" Her tone was friendly, but the question made Melanie's stomach twist into knots. Before she could answer, Jessica's voice cut through the room like a blade. What could she possibly bring? A mop dressed as Santa Claus? The room erupted in laughter. Melanie's face burned as she struggled to maintain her composure. She busied herself wiping the counter, willing herself to disappear. Amanda, looking embarrassed, mumbled something and quickly changed the subject. But Jessica wasn't finished. "You know," she continued, smirking, "not everyone can afford to participate in events like these. Maybe it's best if some people just sit this one out." The words hung in the air, heavy with disdain. As the laughter subsided, Melanie clenched her hands into fists, her nails digging into her palms. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, but the weight of years spent being overlooked and undervalued held her back. Instead, she turned and left the break room, her head held high even as her heart sank. Jessica's words stung, but they also strengthened her resolve. She would bring the tree to the party, no matter what anyone said. That evening, Melanie stood in her living room, staring at the tiny tree. It seemed even smaller now, dwarfed by the shadow of the ridicule she had faced. But as she thought of Clara's excited face and her father's words, she knew she couldn't let the opinions of others dictate her actions. The tree wasn't just an object, it was a testament to her family's resilience and a symbol of the true meaning of Christmas. She carefully arranged the ornaments, making sure each one was secure. The golden foil star still glimmered faintly, and she smiled as she placed it on top. It wasn't grand or flashy, but it was perfect in its own way. "We may not have much," she whispered to herself, "but we have enough." The next morning, as she prepared to leave for work, Melanie hesitated at the door. The tree sat in a small box at her feet, wrapped carefully in a scarf to protect it from the cold. She took a deep breath, steeling herself against the doubt that lingered in her mind. This wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about sharing a piece of her heart, no matter how humble. As she stepped out into the frosty morning, Melanie felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead might be filled with challenges, but she was determined to carry the spirit of the season with her. And as the sun rose over the city, casting a golden glow on the snow-covered streets, she knew she was doing the right thing. That evening, after putting Clara to bed, Melanie found herself sitting at the small kitchen table with the tiny tree in front of her. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the radiator. She reached into the box of ornaments, pulling each one out carefully and placing it on the table. Every piece told a story, each tied to a memory of her family's struggles and triumphs. She picked up a small angel made of paper and string, its edges yellowed with age. It had been crafted by her mother during one of their hardest winters. Melanie could still hear her mother's voice as she reassured them that no matter how difficult life became, they would always have the strength to carry on together. Next, she held a fabric ornament stitched from scraps of her father's old shirts. He had made it during his long nights at the shelter, working by the dim light of a borrowed lamp. Melanie's hands lingered on the golden star. It had been the final addition to the tree, crafted by her father from a discarded candy wrapper. He had polished it until it gleamed, holding it up proudly as he declared, "A star for our tree, and for our future." She closed her eyes and allowed herself to be transported back to that moment, her father's hopeful expression etched into her memory. For Melanie, this tree wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a promise to keep their family's spirit alive. She carefully placed the ornaments on the tree, each one settling into its place like an old friend returning home. As she finished, she stepped back and admired her work. The tree, though small and imperfect, radiated warmth and love. In that moment, Melanie resolved to carry this piece of her family's legacy to the party. Whatever happened, she would honor the tree's history and the resilience it represented. The next morning, as Melanie prepared Clara's breakfast, the little girl wandered into the kitchen rubbing her eyes. "Mommy," Clara said sleepily, climbing onto a chair to sit at the table, "why don't we have a big tree like the one in the store windows?" Melanie paused, her heart aching at the innocent question. She knelt beside Clara, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Do you see this tree, sweetheart?" Melanie asked, pointing to the tiny tree on the table. Clara nodded, her small fingers reaching out to touch one of the fabric ornaments. "This tree is very special," Melanie continued. "When I was your age, we didn't have much, but my daddy, your grandpa, made this tree for us. He wanted to remind us that even when life is hard, we still have each other." Clara tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "So, it's like a magic tree?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Melanie smiled, feeling a swell of pride. "Yes, in a way," she replied. "It's not the biggest or the prettiest tree, but it's filled with love. And that's what makes it special." Clara's face lit up with understanding. "Then it's the best tree ever," she exclaimed, clapping her hands. Melanie laughed and hugged her daughter tightly. Clara's innocent enthusiasm gave her the strength she needed to face the day ahead. No matter what others thought of the tree, she knew that to her and Clara, it was priceless. And that was all that mattered. As she walked to work that morning, Melanie found herself lost in thought, remembering the Christmas when the tiny tree had first entered their lives. It had been a brutal winter, with snow piled high outside the shelter where her family was staying. Her father had spent weeks collecting scraps of wood and fabric, working late into the night to create something that would bring joy to his children. She could still see him sitting at the small workbench in the corner of their shared room, his hands rough and calloused but steady as he carved the tree's base. "A Christmas tree isn't about how big or fancy it is," he had told her when she asked why he was spending so much time on the project. "It's about the love that goes into it. This tree will remind us that even when we have nothing, we still have everything." When he had finally finished, the tree had been a beacon of hope in their small room. Her mother had cried softly when he placed the golden star on top, and Melanie and her siblings had danced around it, laughing and singing carols. That Christmas had been one of their happiest, despite the challenges they faced. It was a reminder that love and unity could make even the darkest days feel bright. The memory brought a smile to Melanie's face as she stepped into the office building. She carried the tree in a small box, its fragile branches carefully wrapped in a scarf. Whatever ridicule she might face, she knew she carried with her the strength of her family and the enduring spirit of that long-ago Christmas. The day of the Christmas party arrived, and the office buzzed with excitement. Employees carried in their decorations, each one more extravagant than the last. Crystal ornaments, designer wreaths, and imported garlands filled the room, turning the space into a glittering winter wonderland. Melanie stood quietly in the corner, clutching the box that held her tree. She hesitated, watching as her coworkers admired each other's contributions. Jessica's voice rang out as she described her custom-made centerpiece, drawing a crowd of admirers. Melanie felt a pang of doubt. Her tree, with its worn ornaments and crooked trunk, seemed so small and insignificant in comparison. For a moment, she considered leaving the box in the closet and slipping out unnoticed. But then she thought of Clara's words, "It's the best tree ever." With a deep breath, Melanie stepped forward and placed the tree on an empty table. The room fell silent for a moment as people turned to look. Jessica's laughter broke the quiet. "What is that supposed to be?" she sneered. "A decoration or a fire hazard?" Melanie's cheeks flushed, but she straightened her shoulders and stood tall. "It's my tree," she said simply. The murmurs and whispers grew louder, but Melanie kept her gaze steady. This tree was more than just an object. It was a piece of her history, a testament to her family's strength. No amount of ridicule could take that away from her. The grand hall where the office Christmas party was held was a stunning display of wealth and extravagance. Towering trees adorned with gleaming lights flanked the entrance, while garlands of fresh pine and holly lined the walls. A golden chandelier cast a warm glow over the tables, each meticulously decorated with centerpieces that looked as though they belonged in a museum. Melanie felt like an intruder in this world of opulence as she carried her tiny tree, cradled protectively in its box. She approached a table designated for decorations, already crowded with ornate contributions. A crystal snowflake shimmered next to a hand-carved wooden sleigh, while a porcelain angel stood gracefully at the center. Melanie hesitated, her breath catching in her throat. The contrast between her modest tree and the grandeur before her was almost laughable. But she reminded herself of Clara's words and the memories tied to the tree. Carefully, Melanie set the tree on the edge of the table, adjusting its base so it stood upright. The golden star at its top tilted slightly, catching the light and giving it a soft, nostalgic glow. For a moment, she allowed herself to hope that maybe someone would appreciate its sentimental value. But then, from across the room, Jessica's shrill voice cut through the air. "Oh my goodness! Is that supposed to be a decoration?" Laughter erupted around her, and Melanie felt her face grow hot. Jessica strutted over to the table, her heels clicking loudly against the polished floor. She leaned down, inspecting the tiny tree with a sneer. "Who brought this thing?" she asked, her voice dripping with mockery. "It looks like it came from a thrift store dumpster." The crowd around her chuckled, emboldened by her confidence. Melanie's hands tightened into fists at her sides, her heart pounding in her chest. "It's mine," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the laughter. Jessica turned to face her, one perfectly arched eyebrow raised. "Yours?" she repeated, her tone incredulous. "I should have guessed." "Well, Melanie, I have to say, this might be the most unique contribution here. Unique in the sense that it doesn't belong." The crowd erupted into laughter again, and Melanie's stomach twisted. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. The room seemed to close in around her, the weight of their ridicule pressing down like a physical force. But just as the laughter reached its peak, a voice cut through the noise. "Wait a minute," someone said. Melanie turned to see Rachel, the CEO's assistant, stepping forward. "What's the story behind this tree?" Rachel's calm but firm tone silenced the room. She approached the table, her sharp eyes scanning the tiny tree with genuine curiosity. "Every decoration has a story," she said, glancing at Melanie. "And I'd like to hear this one." Her words carried an authority that even Jessica couldn't dismiss. The mocking smirks faded, replaced by a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Melanie hesitated, unsure if she could find the strength to speak. But as she met Rachel's kind gaze, she felt a flicker of courage. Taking a deep breath, she began to explain. "This tree, it was made by my father many years ago," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We didn't have much back then. My family was struggling just to get by. But my father wanted to give us something special for Christmas, so he made this tree by hand." The room grew quiet as Melanie continued. "Every piece of it has a meaning. The ornaments are made from scraps of fabric and paper. The star at the top was crafted from a candy wrapper he found. It wasn't about how it looked, it was about the love and hope he poured into it." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, the memories filling her with a sense of pride. "This tree reminded us that even in the hardest times, we had each other. And that was enough." Melanie's words hung in the air, weaving a tapestry of resilience and love that touched even the most cynical hearts in the room. She looked around, her gaze meeting those of her coworkers. Some shifted uncomfortably, others avoided her eyes altogether. But a few looked genuinely moved, their expressions softening as they absorbed her story. Even Jessica seemed at a loss for words, her usual confidence dimmed by the weight of the moment. Rachel stepped closer, her hand resting gently on Melanie's shoulder. "That's a beautiful story," she said warmly. "This tree represents the true spirit of Christmas, love, family, and hope." She turned to the crowd, her voice firm. "It's easy to get caught up in the glitz and glamour of the season, but let's not forget what it's really about. This tree may be small, but its meaning is enormous." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. One by one, people began to approach the table, examining the tiny tree with newfound respect. "It's beautiful," someone said softly. Another added, "It's amazing how much love went into it." For the first time that evening, Melanie felt the crushing weight of judgment begin to lift. Her father's legacy, once the target of ridicule, was now a source of inspiration. As the initial chatter faded, a deep silence filled the room. It wasn't an awkward or uneasy quiet but one of reflection. Melanie stood beside Rachel, her heart still pounding but with a different rhythm now, one of pride and gratitude. She had shared something deeply personal, and instead of mockery, she found understanding. The warmth in the room felt palpable, as though the tiny tree's story had melted the icy barriers between her and her colleagues. Jessica, who had led the earlier ridicule, seemed rooted in place. Her face, usually composed and smug, was now flushed with what appeared to be embarrassment. She opened her mouth to speak but quickly closed it again, unable to meet Melanie's eyes. For a fleeting moment, Melanie felt a pang of vindication, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of relief. Rachel, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, stepped forward and addressed the group. "Why don't we make this tree the centerpiece of tonight's decorations?" she suggested, her tone leaving little room for argument. "After all, it embodies the true meaning of Christmas better than anything else here." The room erupted into a chorus of agreement, and for the first time in years, Melanie felt like she belonged. The tiny tree, once the object of scorn, was carefully lifted by Rachel and placed in the center of the room. Its crooked trunk and patchy branches stood in stark contrast to the polished, elaborate decorations surrounding it, but it seemed to radiate a quiet dignity that drew everyone's attention. Melanie watched, her emotions a tumultuous blend of pride and disbelief. She had expected ridicule, but instead, her father's tree was being celebrated as the heart of the evening. Employees began to approach the tree, their earlier mockery replaced with quiet reverence. Amanda, the young intern, stepped forward, pulling a small ornament from her pocket. "Can I add this to your tree?" she asked softly, her cheeks pink with embarrassment. Melanie hesitated, then nodded, her throat too tight with emotion to speak. Amanda gently hung the ornament, a tiny glass snowflake, on one of the tree's branches. Others followed Amanda's lead. An older accountant added a small wooden bell, explaining it had belonged to her mother. A shy IT technician placed a paper crane he had folded himself, muttering something about how it symbolized peace. Melanie stood to the side, tears welling in her eyes as the tree became a tapestry of stories and shared humanity. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen. As the tree continued to transform, the room hushed as Mr. Whitaker, the company's CEO, stepped forward. Known for his stoic demeanor and commanding presence, his approach instantly captured everyone's attention. He studied the tree for a long moment, his expression inscrutable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he began to speak, his voice softer than usual. "When I was a boy," he began, "my family didn't have much either. My father worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, and my mother made our Christmas decorations by hand. We didn't have a tree this fancy, or gifts piled high, but we had love." He turned to face the crowd, his eyes scanning the room. "Melanie's tree reminds me of what we often forget during the holidays. The spirit of Christmas isn't in how much we spend, but in how much we care." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Mr. Whitaker placed a hand on Melanie's shoulder, his gaze steady. "Thank you for reminding us of that," he said warmly. Melanie could only nod, her heart too full to respond. Around the room, employees exchanged glances, their earlier focus on materialism replaced with a sense of humility and reflection. The mood of the party shifted entirely. The once competitive atmosphere, where employees had sought to outdo one another with lavish displays, gave way to a collective spirit of generosity and camaraderie. Decorations that had been chosen for their opulence were now repurposed to add to the tiny tree. Someone draped a strand of sparkling ribbon across its branches, while another added a delicate string of fairy lights, their soft glow illuminating the room. Jessica, who had been silent since her earlier ridicule, stepped forward hesitantly. In her hand, she held a gleaming silver ornament shaped like a dove. "I'd like to add this," she said, her voice uncharacteristically quiet. Melanie hesitated, searching Jessica's face for any sign of malice, but found only sincerity. She nodded, and Jessica carefully placed the ornament on the tree. "I'm sorry," Jessica murmured, avoiding Melanie's eyes. "I shouldn't have judged you." Melanie's lips parted in surprise, but she managed a small smile. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft but steady. The act, though small, felt monumental. It was as if the tree's story had softened even the hardest hearts, creating a ripple of kindness that spread through the room. For the first time, Melanie felt the warmth of acceptance, not just as an employee, but as an equal. By the time the last ornament was added, the tiny tree had been completely transformed. Its once sparse branches now held an eclectic mix of decorations, each carrying its own story and meaning. The golden star at the top, though worn and slightly bent, seemed to glow brighter in the presence of the new additions. Employees stood around the tree, admiring its beauty not for its perfection, but for the depth of emotion it represented. Rachel stepped forward again, holding a small card and pen. "I think it would be nice if we all wrote down what Christmas means to us," she suggested. "We can hang the cards on the tree as a reminder of tonight." The idea was met with enthusiastic agreement, and soon, the room was filled with the quiet sound of pens scratching against paper. Melanie watched as her colleagues took turns hanging their cards on the tree. Some wrote about family, others about gratitude, and a few shared personal stories of hardship and triumph. When it was her turn, Melanie hesitated, unsure of what to write. Finally, she wrote, "Christmas is about hope, love, and remembering that even the smallest light can brighten the darkest night." She placed her card on the tree, feeling a profound sense of closure. As the party wound down, Jessica approached Melanie once more, this time with a more open expression. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice sincere. "I was wrong to judge you and your tree. I think I've been so focused on appearances that I forgot what really matters." She paused, wringing her hands nervously. "Your story reminded me of my own grandmother. She didn't have much, but she always found a way to make Christmas special." Melanie nodded, her heart softening. "It's easy to forget," she said gently. "But I'm glad you see it now." Jessica gave a small, grateful smile. "If it's all right with you, I'd like to make it up to you somehow." Melanie hesitated, unsure how to respond, but Jessica's sincerity seemed genuine. "Maybe next Christmas, we can work on something together," Jessica added, her voice hopeful. "Maybe," Melanie replied with a small smile. As Jessica walked away, Melanie felt a sense of peace. It wasn't just the tree that had transformed that night, it was the people around her. And as she looked at the glowing tree, now a symbol of unity and hope, she knew her father's legacy had touched more lives than she ever imagined. As the evening progressed, Mr. Whitaker returned to the front of the room, clearing his throat to gather everyone's attention. "Tonight has been about more than just a party," he began, his voice resonating with authority. "It's been a chance to reflect on what truly matters, not just during the holidays, but every day. And tonight, one person reminded us of the importance of humility, resilience, and love." Melanie froze as Mr. Whitaker turned his gaze toward her. "Melanie," he said, "your story and your tree have shown us what it means to hold on to hope, even in the toughest times. It's a lesson many of us, myself included, needed to hear." The room erupted into applause, and Melanie felt her cheeks flush as every pair of eyes turned toward her. She hadn't expected to be singled out, let alone celebrated. "More than that," Mr. Whitaker continued, "your dedication and hard work haven't gone unnoticed. On behalf of the company, I'd like to recognize you for your contributions, not just tonight, but every day." He handed her a small envelope, which Melanie accepted with trembling hands. Opening it, she gasped softly. Inside was a certificate of recognition, along with a generous bonus. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked up, overwhelmed by the moment. The applause hadn't yet died down when Mr. Whitaker made another announcement. "In the spirit of giving, our company will be starting a new tradition," he said. "Beginning this year, we'll be establishing a scholarship fund for the children of our employees. We want to ensure that every child has the opportunity to pursue their dreams, just as Melanie's father ensured she had the hope to keep moving forward." Melanie's heart swelled as the room filled with cheers and murmurs of approval. She thought of Clara and the opportunities this scholarship could provide. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. For the first time in years, Melanie felt that her hard work and sacrifices were not just noticed but truly valued. The burden she had carried for so long seemed a little lighter. After the announcement, several coworkers approached her, offering warm congratulations and apologies for their earlier behavior. Even Jessica managed a sincere smile as she said, "You deserve this, Melanie." Truly. Melanie could hardly find the words to respond, but she thanked each person, her gratitude spilling out in quiet, heartfelt words. As the evening wound down, the mood in the room was lighter than it had been all year. The tiny tree stood proudly in the center, its branches now heavy with ornaments and cards, each representing the unique stories and emotions of everyone present. Employees who had barely spoken to one another before were now laughing and sharing memories, brought together by the unexpected unity sparked by Melanie's story. Melanie found herself talking to Amanda, who shyly admitted, "I was nervous about joining this company, but tonight made me feel like I'm part of something bigger." Another colleague, an older man from accounting, shared a story about his own humble beginnings, saying, "Your father's tree reminded me of my family's first Christmas in this country. We didn't have much either, but we had each other." Jessica, who had been quiet most of the evening, approached Melanie once more. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began. "And about what Mr. Whitaker said, too. I realize now that I've been too focused on myself and what others think of me. I want to do better. Thank you for opening my eyes." Melanie nodded, her smile kind. "It's never too late to see things differently," she replied. The next morning, Melanie arrived at work to find the tiny tree prominently displayed in the company's main lobby. A small plaque at its base read, "The Hope Tree, a symbol of resilience and unity." Melanie's heart swelled as she stood before it, marveling at how something so small and humble had become such a powerful symbol. Employees passed by, pausing to admire the tree and read the cards hanging from its branches. Rachel approached, her usual efficiency softened by a warm smile. "The CEO thought it would be fitting to keep the tree here through the holiday season," she explained. "It's become more than a decoration, it's a reminder of what really matters." Melanie nodded, her eyes misting with tears. "It means the world to me," she said softly. "Thank you for believing in me." Over the next few days, the tree became a focal point for the office. Employees stopped by to add their own cards or ornaments, turning it into a living testament to their shared humanity. Melanie often found herself standing near the tree during her breaks, marveling at the way its story had brought people together. When Melanie told Clara about the tree's new home, the little girl's eyes widened with delight. "Mommy, they liked your tree?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Melanie nodded, pulling Clara into a hug. "They did, sweetheart," she said. "They even called it the Hope Tree." Clara beamed, her pride evident. "I told you it was the best tree ever." The following weekend, Melanie brought Clara to the office to see the tree. The little girl ran straight to it, her tiny hands reaching out to touch the ornaments. "Mommy, it's so beautiful," she exclaimed, her voice echoing through the quiet lobby. Melanie watched, her heart full as Clara admired the decorations and read some of the cards aloud. One of the security guards, a kind older man named Joe, approached them with a warm smile. "This tree has been quite the attraction," he said. "You must be proud." Melanie nodded, her hand resting on Clara's shoulder. "I am," she admitted. "Not just of the tree, but of how it's brought people together." Joe tipped his hat to Clara and said, "You've got a good mom, young lady." Clara grinned. "I know," she replied confidently. That evening, when Melanie and Clara returned home, they were met with an unexpected surprise. In their living room stood a brand new Christmas tree, tall and sparkling with lights and ornaments. Beside it was a pile of gifts wrapped in colorful paper. Clara gasped, her eyes wide with amazement. "Mommy! Where did this come from?" Melanie found a note tucked into one of the branches. It read, "Merry Christmas, Melanie and Clara. Thank you for reminding us what the season is truly about. With love, your coworkers." Tears streamed down Melanie's face as she read the note, her heart overwhelmed by the kindness of her colleagues. Clara danced around the tree, her joy infectious. For the first time in years, Melanie felt surrounded by a community that cared. The new tree, though beautiful, didn't replace her father's tiny tree. It stood as a companion, a testament to the power of love and generosity. That night, as Clara drifted off to sleep under the glow of the lights, Melanie sat by the tree, her heart full of gratitude and hope. Christmas morning dawned with a soft glow, the sunlight streaming through the frosted windows of Melanie's apartment. Clara woke early, bounding out of bed with uncontainable excitement. "Mommy, it's Christmas," she cried, tugging Melanie from her sleep. Melanie laughed, pulling on her robe as Clara darted to the living room. The sight of the brightly lit tree and the carefully wrapped gifts took Clara's breath away. "Can we open them now?" Clara asked, her eyes wide with anticipation. Melanie nodded, settling beside her daughter on the floor. As they unwrapped the gifts, Clara's laughter and gasps of delight filled the room. Each present, a set of books, a warm winter coat, and a collection of art supplies, had been chosen with care. Melanie's co-workers had thought of everything, leaving her both touched and overwhelmed. Among the gifts, Melanie found an envelope addressed to her. Inside was a card signed by everyone at the office, along with a handwritten note from Mr. Whitaker. "Thank you for reminding us of the beauty in simplicity and the power of hope. Merry Christmas to you and Clara." Tucked behind the card was a gift card to a local grocery store, ensuring that Melanie wouldn't have to worry about their next few months of meals. Melanie sat back, watching Clara explore her new art supplies with delight. The room was warm, filled with the soft glow of the tree lights and the laughter of her daughter. For the first time in years, Melanie felt the weight of her struggles lifting, replaced by a sense of peace and hope. This Christmas, more than any other, felt like a true miracle. When Melanie returned to work after the holidays, the Hope tree was still proudly displayed in the lobby. It had become a focal point for the office, a gathering place where employees stopped to reflect and add new ornaments. Even after Christmas, it remained as a symbol of unity, resilience, and the deeper meanings of the season. Rachel approached Melanie one afternoon, carrying a fresh box of decorations. "We've decided to make the Hope tree a yearly tradition," she explained. "Every Christmas, we'll bring it out and add to it, so its story continues to grow." Melanie's heart swelled with pride and gratitude. "I think my father would have loved that," she said softly, her eyes misting over. The tradition quickly gained momentum, with employees bringing ornaments from their own families to contribute. Each edition came with a story, shared and celebrated, further deepening the tree's meaning. For Melanie, seeing her father's tree honored in such a way felt like a victory, not just for her, but for the values he had instilled in her: love, resilience, and the power of hope. At home, Melanie and Clara continued their own tradition with the tiny tree. Every year, they added a new ornament, each representing a memory or milestone. That year, Melanie crafted a small snowflake out of paper, marking the incredible journey her family had taken from hardship to joy. Clara, ever creative, painted a tiny star to hang beside it. Their apartment, once so modest and quiet, was now filled with warmth and laughter. Clara's artwork decorated the walls, and the fridge was covered in colorful drawings and reminders of school projects. Melanie's heart swelled with pride as she watched her daughter thrive, knowing that the scholarship would open doors for Clara's future. On Christmas Eve, they sat together by the tree, sipping hot cocoa and singing carols. "Mommy," Clara said suddenly, her voice thoughtful, "do you think Grandpa can see our tree from heaven?" Melanie smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "I think he can," she replied softly. "And I think he's very proud of us." The following Christmas, Melanie's co-workers gathered around the Hope Tree in the office lobby for a small ceremony. Over the year, the tree had been carefully stored and cherished, its ornaments catalogued and preserved. Employees shared stories about how the tree's legacy had inspired them in their own lives, sparking acts of kindness and reflection. Melanie was invited to speak, and though she felt nervous, she stepped forward with quiet confidence. "This tree represents more than just my family's story," she began. "It's a reminder that even the smallest acts of love and kindness can grow into something extraordinary. It's a symbol of what we can accomplish when we come together and support one another." The room erupted into applause, and Melanie felt the warmth of their appreciation wash over her. As the ceremony concluded, she noticed Jessica approaching, holding a small, beautifully wrapped gift. "This is for you and Clara," Jessica said, her voice genuine. "Thank you for showing me what really matters." Melanie accepted the gift with a grateful smile, knowing that the Hope Tree had changed more than just her life, it had touched the lives of everyone around her. As she left the office that evening, Melanie glanced back at the Hope Tree, its golden star gleaming brightly at the top. It was no longer just a relic of her past, it was a beacon for the future, a testament to the enduring power of love, resilience, and hope. And as the snow began to fall softly outside, Melanie felt certain that her father's legacy would live on, shining brightly for years to come.